Through the years, occasionally invited to speak on a Wednesday night series, and the person doing the inviting said you can choose any, passage that you want to, but just want to make sure we don't overlap with someone else. And when you ask, well, has anyone chosen the Wisdom's creation hymn in Proverbs 8? So far, no one has ever chosen that, especially if they have kind of the whole Bible to look at. And tonight's lesson is too big to tell. And I love that expression because there are some things in the biblical story and the events that happened that we kind of can go so far, and then it's kind of broader than our grasp and wider than our comprehension. But as we start, and this was just, if we were a smaller group, we could just go around and talk about this. But I'd just like you to stop and think, what are some of the just amazing things that you have seen somewhere around the world in terms of God's creation? Some people will be the aspen trees turning in Colorado in the fall, and just the brilliance of that. I guess probably because growing up in a cotton field and, what was the edge of the Dust Bowl, I never get tired of the ocean. And just being there and just feeling the surge of the ocean coming in and out. There's just something about that that's just so therapeutic. And the very first spring that we were in Australia in the October holiday, then we went south of Sydney about an hour and a half. This little town's called Kiama. And a part of the kind of a peninsula slips out, and there's a tunnel right at the length of the water, and it's kind of like Old Faithful. It's called the blowhole, and when everything's right, the tide comes in and this water comes surging out. And behind it are mountains, and the old advertisement said, oh, this is where the mountain touches the sea. And so, Lord willing, when we go back, then we still go and live about 50 yards from a lighthouse for 2 or 3 days and just kind of sink in just the joy of being close to the ocean and everything. But one of those early mornings as I got up, there was a complete full moon going down in the west, and then we just had this brilliant sunrise coming up in the east over the ocean with just all the colors and everything. And you just kind of stood there and you just thought, isn't this absolutely magnificent? And then you think, oh, God said. God said. And the very idea that God spoke this magnificent universe into existence is just beyond our physical comprehension, to have a power to be able to speak all of those things into existence. So tonight, in the same way that when we read a passage in the New Testament, I like the word echo, we will hear an echo from a passage from the Old Testament. And one of the things, Lord willing, in the future that I'd like to talk about during the Lord's Supper is just this amazing statement going back to the original Passover lamb, not one of his bones are to be broken. And that was something that was done 1,500 years earlier, and they originally killed the Passover lamb. The blood goes on the sides and the top of the door, and literally the death angel passed over. And so for 1,500 years, they are still to celebrate the sacrifice, literally, of the Passover lamb. And this was to be done in the temple and on and on. And then how was it possible that you have nails in his hands, the beating and everything else, and the Lamb of God, not a bone is broken? And you read that event in the Gospels, and then you hear these echoes that go all the way back into the Old Testament. Well, tonight, excuse me a second. Wisdom, and as we said, is personified She's given personality, given voice in the form of a woman, and we'll refer to her as Lady Wisdom, but we're going to hear echoes from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And as wisdom extols, and again, of course, wisdom is for us and for the readers, and it has to do with a spiritual posture that as its foundation is the fear of the Lord. But wisdom is this ability to grow in discernment and in prudence. And Lord willing, one of the things that we'll talk about, a part of wisdom has to do with timing. There's the time to speak, and there's the time that we shouldn't speak. But one of the things that I think about in looking again at wisdom as a woman, there are kind of 5 scattered references in the book of Proverbs to women, and one is Lady Wisdom, and that's who we're going to primarily be with tonight. We also hear the voice of a married woman who is an adventuress and is going out at night, claiming her husband's not there. We're going to hear the voice of what's called the loose woman, and we're also then going to hear the voice in action of the excellent woman, the excellent wife. And anticipate this. When we come to Proverbs 31, and because wisdom has been personified in female figure, in form, and in speech, when we come to the description of the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31, it's an acrostic. And let's just do this in English. It starts in verse 10, letter A. Verse 11 is B. Do you see what I'm saying? And so and of course, I'm not doing this in Hebrew, just do it in English. But each of the verses for the virtuous woman start with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Here's my question. What do you do when you get to X, Y, and Z? Do you see what I'm saying? When you're starting with A, B, and C, that's pretty good, and you can think of all these different words. But here's something that is just given a great deal of thought, a great deal of study, and it is an alphabetic acrostic, which doesn't come to us in English because it will be written in Hebrew. There is going to be a psalm that's an alphabetic acrostic, and there are chapters in Lamentations. Jeremiah writes the lament about the fall of Jerusalem, and there's a chapter there that it's an alphabetic acrostic. And so you just stop and think, if you were doing this in English, how much thought would you have to give to using every letter in the alphabet as the start of a sentence that goes through? And that's how the book of Proverbs is going to end. I'm going to read chapter 8 because we'll do some highlights, but particularly we'll come back to verses 22 through 31. And we started by saying, and we're talking primarily about Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, the loose woman. Wisdom is personified in the figures of 2 women, and both of the women are soliciting. Last week, we didn't touch all the details in chapter 7, but here's a whole chapter to the loose woman out soliciting, and then we come to chapter 8, and then here is Lady Wisdom. Does not wisdom call, and does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, in the paths she takes her stand, and besides the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portal she cries aloud. Quick footnote. If you mark in your Bible, I'd really recommend you to do this, and I did mine originally in yellow. There are several quotations, especially in these first 9 chapters, and if you have a newer translation, if you notice, you start quotation marks in verse 4, and then when you just keep looking and looking and looking, the quotation goes down to verse 36. So this is what I'm saying. Wisdom is personified in the figure of this woman, and she is going to be speaking, and Lord willing, we'll look at speeches next week. And this is why in these first 9 chapters, well, let me do it the other way. From chapter 10 on, a lot of times we'll have kind of single verses that will be just kind of like this little nugget, this little jewel of wisdom. But in these earlier chapters especially, we have these kind of extended speeches. And so this one starts in chapter 8 and verse 4. To you, O men, I call, and my cry is to the sons of men. O simple ones, learn prudence, and O foolish men, pay attention. So she's going to call to men, and some would translate mankind, the sons of men, the simple, and even those who are foolish. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There is nothing twisted or crooked in them. They are straight to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge instead of choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her. I, wisdom, dwell in prudence. I find knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance in the way of evil and perverted speech I hate. Verse 14. I have counsel and sound wisdom. I have insight. I have strength. By me kings reign and rulers decree what is just, and by me princes rule and nobles govern the earth. I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently will find me. Riches and honor are with me, enduring wealth and prosperity. My fruit is better than gold, even fine gold, and my yield than choice silver. I walk in the way of righteousness and in the path of justice, endowing with wealth those who love me and filling their treasuries. Now listen to this paragraph, and this is why I like the word echoes. Listen to Genesis 1 and 2, but spoken here through the voice of Lady Wisdom. The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago, I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. Now, let me just pause. When we did our Old Testament, walking through the Old Testament, one of the things that we talked about, especially when we come to the predestination and the plan of God, and that is the sending of Christ to die is before day one. Paul will oftentimes use the word before the foundation of the world. And those who were in the class, I told you, I'm teaching 5-year-olds, and we got through, and adults said, what did you study? And I said, well, we studied about the pre-existence and the foreknowledge of God and the predestination of the coming to Christ. And they said to 5-year-olds, and I said, yes. We sang day one, God made light, and we had someone stand for day one. And then we told someone, we want you to be Christ, and you go on the other side of day one. And before God says, let there be light, in his mind was the plan already to send Christ into the world. Well, in the same way, then wisdom is saying, before God said on day one, let there be light, then he created wisdom. And again, in terms of personification, giving a spiritual principle, a voice, and a personality, wisdom is not another God, but wisdom is we're going to see, is kind of like the observer. Wisdom is there with God, and as you go through each of the days of creation, then wisdom is saying, I was there with God when the universe was created. So we're now in chapter 8, and look in verse 24. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth, before he made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world, when he established the heavens, I was there, when he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, and when he established the fountains of the deep, and when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth. To hear all these echoes about creation, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and God said, next day, and God said, then I was beside him like a master workman. And we're going to talk about the word architect for workman, but we'll come back to that. I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the sons of men. And now, my sons, listen to me. Happy are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Happy is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates and waiting beside my doors. For he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who misses me injures himself, and all who hate me love death. And so what we're going to have, and this is, I tried to state this in the CI is the central idea. Wisdom is personified as the quality of God that was a part of producing life. And what we're going to have is that in the same way that wisdom was there when the physical universe was being created, rejoicing and delighting in the sons of men as God creates the whole universe for mankind to live in, then wisdom is also going to be the source of spiritual life for those who are the heirs of those God created from the very beginning. And we want to look at the understanding of how the origins of wisdom, and what wisdom is going to say is that God created me, God formed me, and we're going to go back to our little expression, before he said, let there be light. The thinking, the planning, the person, the personality of God to bring order out of chaos is going to be a part of what wisdom is the spectator to. So when we look at number one, Lady Wisdom gives speeches throughout these first 9 chapters. And for example, chapter 1, 20 through 33 is an entire speech. Here's chapter 8. Lord willing, we'll see one again next week. Wisdom again will be out soliciting and calling. There'll be kind of a summary of some things. And then Lady Folly, is the loose woman, is going to be, and I like the word soliciting. Both of those are out trying to influence people. So the Father gives his Son instructions about wisdom throughout these chapters. But then wisdom is personified in that she has a voice and she speaks to the Son about the nature of wisdom. Proverbs 8, the longest and fullest discussion about the nature and origins of wisdom in Scripture. And at the heart of this, again, God creates wisdom, she says, before she says, let there be light. We're going to come back to this, but look at 1:5. Wisdom, and I think of this as an observer, but we're also going to look at this word architect, workman here in a little bit. I was beside him, wisdom is saying. So here's God speaking the universe into existence, and wisdom says, I was beside him like a master workman, and we'll talk about the word architect here. I was daily his delight. Isn't that interesting? This personification of wisdom, she says, well, let's say it this way. Every day God says what when the day is finished? That's good. That's good. And then when we have, and we'll come to this, the only thing that God did not speak into existence was, you could say either who or what, Adam. And it's an anthropomorphism. Anthropology is the word for mankind. It's like with the fingers, God shapes man out of the dust of the ground. And a part of that, again, is just to give this very uniqueness. The rest of the universe is spoken into existence, but the one thing that God, then the description is as if he formed from the dust, is man. And then what happens? Oh, he breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, and man becomes a living soul. And when that day is finished, God says, very good. And so wisdom is saying, as this creation develops, as it forms, God is saying, oh, isn't this good? Oh, isn't that good? And wisdom says, okay, I was beside him, I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of men. So in a sense, and this is totally true, God's wisdom is beyond time and space. It's just virtually beyond our comprehension. And one of the things that just encourage you to do, wherever we are in the world, there are just manifestations of the power of God if we just open our eyes and look at them. And again, we talked about this in the Old Testament class. Through the wintertime, from the astronomy traditions, he's called Orion, the hunter. And early in the evening, rises up, and he has 3 stars that are supposedly like his belt, and there's stars down for his sword, and there's like a shoulder point and a knee point, and he'll start kind of flat and then rise up, and through the evening, then Orion moves across the sky. And when we were at Oklahoma Christian, we were dating, anytime it was a clear night, we just tried to see, and Sheila called him the little man. Well, he's vast. And what does God ask Job? Oh, by the way, Job, have you loosed the cords of Orion lately? Have you kind of adjusted his belt? and here we are as mortal human beings, and we look up, and here's this magnificent figure in the stars that passes across, and we have nothing to do with when it comes up, and we have nothing to do when it goes down, and created by the power of God. The reason this is so special is that because he's in our southern sky, we're in Australia in the wintertime in July, and guess what? Orion is in the northern sky in Australia, but he's upside down. And if you notice, the full moon has what one of my English friends calls a birthmark. There's just this large kind of dark spot on the side of the moon, and when the moon comes up in Australia, the moon's upside down. And all you have to do is just get next to a wall and stand on your head and look at it, and that's exactly what it looks like on the other side of the earth. And the Aboriginals have various traditions and various stories about what the Greeks called Orion. And when you read Scripture, then God asked Job, oh, by the way, Job, have you just kind of reached up and either tightened the belt of Orion, and we're so far and we're so helpless. And God speaks all of that into existence. And wisdom says, day by day as that took place, let me just shake the chills down, I was right there with him. I was his companion. And we were rejoicing in the beauty of God's creation. And I was his delight. And I especially delighted in who? The sons of men. Do you remember from the very beginning we said wisdom literature commends in poetical form what the law commands? And we read these early chapters of Genesis, and here's the very specific organized days of creation. And then we come to this poetic section, and wisdom says, while all of that was going on, I was there beside him, and we were rejoicing and we were delighting in the creation. 2:1, we've done this earlier, but we always have new people in the class, and I'll just do this really quickly. This is a New Testament term, but it's so true of our word wisdom. William Barclay has this statement. He said, a word is like a person. It has a history, it has a heredity. A word is like a person in that it keeps certain company, and it is known by the company that it keeps. A word, by its history, its pedigree, and its experience, acquires a certain atmosphere and flavor. And when I read this, I always think, okay, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And you try to put murder or theft or adultery, and it doesn't fit. Words of a feather flock together. And you read the fruit of the Spirit, and they all have this shared heritage and background. Well, the same thing is true of our word wisdom. Wisdom is going to have a certain company, certain words are going to be used in conjunction with wisdom, and we'll look at this here in a second. 2:2, notice this. Lady Wisdom is bold. She's out in the street. She's in the squares. She's at the city gates from chapter 1, 20 and 21. She is going to be shouting from the hilltop near the road in the crossroads, Proverbs 8, 1 and 2. She's in public places where crowds gather, the gates in front of the town. She's not afraid of strangers. She has an important message. And notice this, we know people by the company that they keep and the people they avoid. And look at the words of a feather that flock together when you come across wisdom. You'll have words like understanding, 8:1, prudence, 8:5, righteousness, 8:6, truth, 8:7, wholesome behavior, 8:8, good judgment, 8:12, and then these terms like common sense, success, insight, and strength. And at the same time, Lady Wisdom stays as far away as possible from deception, evil, pride, and arrogance. And wisdom is not so much an intellectual category as it is behavior, and I use the term ethical behavior. And this is what's significant. And we'll touch on this in a totally different way, Lord willing, later. He's 12 years old. And Luke is going to say, Jesus, and the word grow is so interesting. Our former youth director at Eastside is just like our son, and his son is in the 8th grade, probably about 6'2", wearing a size 13 shoe, and he looks like an overgrown pup who's got these big paws who hasn't grown into the size of that yet. And I've got to go watch them play basketball, and he's doing really, really well, but you stop and think, what's a 13-year-old who's 6'2" and wearing a size 13 shoe going to look like at 18 as he grows into his frame and everything and develops? And that's what happens with Jesus. Jesus grew. It's oxano, it's the idea of development. But what's the very first thing that Luke says? He grew in wisdom. And then he grew in stature. And then he grew in favor with God. Isn't that amazing? The Word becomes flesh and dwells among us. And he wasn't given the divine qualities in the human side. And he grows in favor with God. And he grows in favor with man. And the very first thing that is said about our Lord at 12 years of age is that he is growing in wisdom, which again I take to be saying the right thing at the right time. Maybe not saying something. Sorry, I just can't help this. Like I said, Clay was the age of our youngest daughter, and I was at cross-country meets and all this stuff, and he goes to Oklahoma Christian and starts dating this beautiful young lady. She's dark-headed, and she comes and visits a few times, and then Zoom, we don't see her. She's just not there at all. And, like I said, he's kind of like my son. I said, okay, Clay, that girl you used to bring? And he said, Scripture's sharper than a two-edged sword. I said, yeah. He said, well, there's a proverb that says, and he quoted this to her, a beautiful woman without discretion is like a gold ring in a pig's snout. And for some reason, she was offended. I don't know why. And she is a beautiful girl. And Clay was just kind of talking and messing around a little bit, but he quoted a verse to her, and he said, like a beautiful woman without discretion is like a gold ring in a pig's snout. And she didn't talk to him for 3 months. Well, then she came back, and I'm thankful, sometimes, and again, something comes to mind. I started to say, Clay, where's that cute little blonde-headed girl that we haven't seen for a while? Because this girl has really dark hair, and I thought, okay, don't do that. Don't stir the pot, anything. But what's wisdom? Sometimes, and we've all done this, we've said something, and as soon as we've said that, we wish we could push rewind or delete and bring that back in. And then, Gary, you and I have left, and sometimes we should have said something, and we just either didn't have the nerve or the. And so this wisdom has to do with timing. And here's our words: prudence, perception, and insight. And this is what I want you to anticipate. If Jesus grew in these from 12 as he heads towards his ministry, what does that say about you and I in our need to grow in wisdom in our conduct and in our daily life? So when you look at chapter 8, and this is like number 3, nearly to the bottom, this first part is a guide for every man, just people in general. And then wisdom is a partner of morality. And this is so important because the largest sections in these first 9 chapters is the temptation of, whether it's the loose woman or the married woman, to be involved in immorality. Wisdom is going to be the key to our success. And we'll touch on this. It's the principle of creation and the one necessity of life. So we'll do this next part very quickly and just hang on and let's go through this. When you are introduced to wisdom, there's an invitation. Listen and gain wisdom. And that's the call. And this is the Lady Wisdom out on the street calling people to her. And why? Wisdom is noble, just, and true. Then there's a second invitation. Receive instruction and knowledge because wisdom is valuable. And so here come a list of consequences. And this is on the second page, the back page, number 2. And look at the consequences or the rewards. And this is where, again, as wisdom goes out, she says, here is the opportunity, here's the call to listen, to follow in the steps of wisdom. And look at the benefits. They are straight to him who understands, they are right. Take my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than gold. Wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you desire cannot compare with her. And here's again the cousin words. I, wisdom, dwell in prudence, 8:12. I find knowledge and discretion. And the fear of the Lord, this is going to be the thread that runs through Proverbs, the foundation of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance in the way of evil and perverted speech I hate. And here's the words: counsel, sound wisdom, insight, strength. And this is the best way for kings to rule. 8:17, I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently find me. And then again, the call, righteousness, wisdom, all of these things are better than earthly wealth. But here again is this creation aspect, and this is under Roman numeral 3. And I just put the eternity of wisdom. And wisdom says, and I'm using her terms, she was the first of God's created acts. And that's why I just think about this sometimes, and at some point I just let it go because I'm just trying to get my little mind around this. Before he says, let there be light, wisdom says, I was the first of God's created acts. Look at the word before, 8:22. Before the beginning of the world, before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth, before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. And wisdom says, before anything that's physical is here in the universe, God created me. And then here's the word when. So we're going to move in time from before to here's some things that happen. When there were no depths, when there were no springs, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, 8:28. When he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, 29, when he assigned the sea its limits so that the waters might not transgress, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. And here again are these poetic descriptions of creation. And I know this is totally silly, but I sometimes go down to the sea and I just go, no, 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 you can't come any further. God has set the limits. And there's several times you read through Scripture, God set the limits for these various parts of his creation. And wisdom goes through all of these beautiful things that are part of the world around us. And we look at this, but look at the parallel. I was beside him like a master workman. And sometimes all the way from the word nurse to the word architect, builder are there. I believe God says, and we're going to see later, Jesus is the agency of creation. Remember? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All things were made through him or by him, Jesus, and without him was not anything made that was made. So we find this out in the New Testament. God says, Jesus did, and then wisdom says, kind of as an observer, like the architect or the workman, I was with God and was daily his delight. And you'll notice that, and I put the letter A, and then twice the word rejoicing. Rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world. And then we come back to the word delight, delighting in the sons of men. So here are the blessings of wisdom. And words like happiness, wisdom, life, favor. And again, poetry commending. How does the book of Psalms start? Blessed, happy is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, or stands in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of the scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. That man will be like a tree planted by rivers of water. He brings forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also doesn't wither, and all that he does will prosper. And the hymn book of Israel starts by saying, happy, blessed is the man. When we open our New Testament, what are some of the earliest words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who mourn. And Brother McCord in his translation just put the word happy. And this is a part of the rejoicing of wisdom. So here's the blessing. Happy are those who keep my ways, 8:32. Hear instruction, be wise, do not neglect it. Happy is the man who listens, watching daily at my gates. And he who finds me finds life and finds favor in the Lord. So we're going to walk through the last page, and our lesson is yours. And I would just encourage you at some point down the road, just again, to open kind of this heart of the 8th chapter of Proverbs and just delight in the creation of wisdom and then the opportunity that it provides for us for that quality of life. So the poem in Proverbs 8 highlights wisdom, and I use the word pre-existence, speaking of the universe. And when you look at Proverbs 3, 19 through 20, we still are going to hear these echoes from Genesis 2 and 3. And Proverbs 3:13, happy is the man who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. She is a tree of life. And you stop and think, where did we hear tree of life from? Here, see what I mean by the word echo? All the way back to the original creation story. And wisdom says, oh, those who find me are like a tree of life who lay hold of her, and those who hold her fast are called blessed. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens, and by his knowledge the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down the dew. So wisdom is described as its role in God's creation of the universe. She delighted in the created activity, and the universe is designed for our safety. Just this week I was listening to an astronomer talking about the life band that we have around the sun. And he said, even 2 or 3% closer or further away, our lives would be totally different. We'd have people burning and freezing. We're just in this narrowest of life band. And a lot of times when I think of a birthday, I literally think, oh, another lap around the sun. And here we are on this spinning globe, and we're keeping our grandsons this week, and last night our middle one had 2 tops. And like our grandfathers played a lot with tops, and he had these 2 tops, you wind them up and everything, and he was, get them go as long as they could. But what happens? Within a point in time, then they start wobbling and they fall over. And what kind of power is it to put the earth rotating and spinning at the degree that we are in this narrow life band around the sun? And wisdom says, when all that happens, I was there beside him, delighting in the creation of this universe. So wisdom is going to witness God shaping and forming man out of the dust of the ground. And as we said, breathe in his nostrils the breath of life. Number 3, wisdom sets the stage for her desired activity with the humanity, with the man that God created. And here's something very interesting. Remember, God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and the truth. And then what did Jesus tell the Samaritan lady? Such is God seeking those who worship him. And wisdom, in terms of this crying out at the city gates and the streets and in the public, wisdom has been seeking people to follow her before they were conscious that she was there. And in the same way, God is continuing to seek those who worship him in spirit and truth. So was wisdom. So number 4, wisdom is older than the universe and fundamental to its operation. Wisdom is what the Creator considered primary and indispensable. Wisdom is the personification of God's spiritual will for those created in his image. And wisdom, God's will, God's ways, had a front row seat to witness the wonder and the majesty of God speaking the universe into existence. Number 5, and these are just physical terms, but wisdom is saying, I'm the firstborn. Before he makes the universe, I'm the first thing that he created, and he spoke me into existence. And when you look at our universe, there's no blind chance. Within the creation is the loving purpose of God, and the order we see around us in the physical world is a reflection of the character of God as he creates this. And within the conception of the universe, God had human life in mind. I'm convinced it was all made for us. Hugo McCord, for decades, got up at 4 o'clock and ran 2 miles and would study an hour of Hebrew and an hour of Greek and do breakfast, and then he would teach an 8 o'clock class at Oklahoma Christian, and he was the first one there. And he was visiting us in Australia, and I said, Brother McCord, when you get to heaven, what do you want to ask God? And here's a guy who's been reading his Hebrew and his Greek Bible for decades, and I was surprised. He said, why did you make it so big? I said, pardon? He said, the universe. Why did you make it so big just for us? A few years ago, I was asked to do a funeral for a 6-week-old little girl. They had put her to sleep at 12:30, and at 6:30 she was gone. And I was able to visit with Stafford North. And I said, Stafford, you've done a lot of funerals and stuff. Do you have any suggestions? He said, now would be a great time to talk about heaven. No doubt about her salvation, and what a consolation. And this is stuck in my mind. Can you imagine a coffin that's this big? And it has 2 little places on either side for 4 of the brothers to carry their sister out of the church building. And I said, well, you've been studying Revelation for over 50 years. Do you have any thoughts? And he said, yes. He said, I'm convinced that the greatest act of creation since Genesis 1 has yet to take place. Because in the book of Revelation it says, behold, I make all things what? New. And here's wisdom as the evidence of the early creation. And you and I have this all around us. That's the physical. But the power that created the physical universe then is also given to help us in our physical lives as well. So wisdom was there when God brought design and order to the physical chaos. Number 6, the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the deep, God said. And the same order that is brought into the universe, then Lady Wisdom says, that's the spiritual order that I want to bring into your life as the created one. I'm there when this is established from chaos to order, and those who listen to me will have a spiritual sense of order within their lives. So here's the final thought, number 7. Wisdom is a spring of joy, and joy breaks out when the Creator's wisdom is exercised, and the Maker and the creature have delighted because of God's perfect workmanship. I always am interested in this. Let us, isn't that interesting? Let us make man in our image after our likeness. Debbie Powell recently had her 50th wedding anniversary at Britton Road last Saturday. And we were able to go to her dad's funeral out at Tipton on a bitter, bitter cold January, February day. And reflecting, Debbie said, that's the dust that my dad lived in, but that's not my dad. He's gone home to be with his Father. And wisdom says, created in the image of God, and that which is dust on the outside has the capacity to live and be shaped in the form of the Creator. So joy, happiness, and delight are unique emotions to Israel's religion, and wisdom wants to share the joy and the delight that she experiences with God during creation to become the lifestyle of those, including us, who will listen to her voice and follow in the paths of her teaching.